Well, any morning. I want to do a series on building ethical recommenders. I think it's going to be a few different videos, and feel free to drop questions in the comments. But I'm not currently building one at work, but I did spend a bunch of time building them and researching them, so I think it's an interesting question. I don't want to dive too much into the code. I think I might talk about some algorithms and such, but I mostly want to talk about the high level design problems and the issues around building ethical recommenders, because I think it's something that isn't as hard to understand as people think, but it's an important topic, and you'll see why as we sort of dig into it. But today I just want to sort of lay down some of the groundwork. So first of all, what is a recommender, and why do we care about it being ethical? So a recommender, anytime you have, say, 20 things and you have 5 spaces to put things, and you've got to pick 5 things and what order in which to show them, you basically need recommendation logic. The simplest one is obviously showing them in chronological or alphabetical order, you know, that the how newest to oldest, or oldest to newest, or alphabetically. That is a recommendation solution. It's not a very complicated one. It doesn't scale out very well, and we can talk about why. But in some cases it's the right choice, and it's a valid solution. The third one is really what I think most people talk about when they talk about recommenders, and it's basically a set of rules, and often what we'll call a heuristic, to determine which of those goes where and in what order. There's a misconception, I think, that recommenders need to use machine learning. They don't. Many of them do, for a bunch of good reasons. We'll get on to that. And there's also this thinking that the rules have to be super complicated. They don't have to be super complicated. You can get a lot of bang for buck with quite simple rules. So first of all, what do we mean when we say ethical? Well, recommenders, by and large, are built by companies for users to use. The goals and desires of the users don't necessarily line up with those with the platform, for a variety of reasons. We're going to limit in this video series, we're going to limit the problem space to assume A, you've got limited computer power, and B, the users can't just have their own recommender. Because I think one of the best solutions is if you're able to provide the data to users and have user or community build or third parties, and not the user and not the platform recommendation solutions. And I think long term we'll see that more and more. But the difficult thing is it requires a level of access to the data, and obviously running recommendation algorithms is not necessarily cheap. But I think there's good traction there. Data confidentiality gets in a way a lot. But we're going to assume that this is a recommender built by a platform to be used, have users, and that there's some tension there between the two. And we'll talk about where those tensions exist and how they play out. The first thing of ethical, like if you ever talk about ethics in machine learning or ethics in recommenders, a lot of people, where they go is what I would consider like the ground level of the ethical discussion, and that's mostly around data that's been used in machine learning and being fed in. So for example, if you were to look at those 20 things and you would say, okay, I'm going to show stuff by men more than I'm going to show stuff by women, that's sexist and that's against the law in a bunch of places. So you can't encode that. Likewise, there's a lot of other protected statuses around race, religion, military status, just a whole bunch of stuff like that, where you don't want to necessarily, or it is illegal to encode that. Also, if there's something confidential, like someone's date of birth, and you were to feed that into your algorithm may intentionally or unintentionally expose that confidential data. So there's some basic stuff there. So there is a lot of that discussion, and there's a lot of encoded bias stuff. So for example, if you said, I'm gonna penalize or I'm gonna reward people who purchase bras. Well, outside of some amusing edge cases, you've basically just encoded gender into your program. There's some nuanced ways this can happen, and it's a longer conversation that I don't think is useful now, but basically historical bias can encode itself in data in a bunch of ways. So that's what I think a lot of people talk about when they talk about ethics in machine learning, and I don't think that is the problem that we need to solve. I mean, I think we need to regulate for that, and I think that's like a bare bones, but I think that's like us all just agreeing to the basic rules of math, and like 1 + 1 = 2 or whatever. Like that's the groundwork, that's the layer, and we should all be doing that regardless. Now, what I'm talking about more when I talk about ethics in recommenders is people who are using a platform want one thing, platform might want others. So for example, if your recommender is harming people's mental health, you look at how engagement-driven metrics in recommenders, which is the default that everyone uses, and I think the quintessential unethical recommender, because everything is optimized from a maths point of view to increase engagement, because most of these platforms are ad-driven, and that's not necessarily good for people. It's not even necessarily good for, like in the case of YouTube, people making videos or whatever. Like it's a tricky situation. So that's tough, right? There are some other metrics we can encode for. One that's much harder to track that Valve famously uses is minimize regret. They pass a lot of their business decisions through this minimize consumer regret, because if you do that, the customer long term will be happy with the platform. It's a harder one to put that into math, but that's a good way of expressing it. But yeah, like another way that like engagement-based metrics in a recommender could harm an individual and content creator, is if you had 2 videos, cooking videos, right? And one basically was very engaging, but it was more about like food porn, and was more about, oh, you watch another video or you indulge yourself in the video, then that's going to be preferred in the engagement world to a very clear, concise recipe video that showed you how to make a thing, and essentially when you finished the video, you've either made the thing and leave the platform, or you watch the video and then go away and make the thing. And now you've left the platform, so from the engagement metric, that's a failure in the system. These are simplistic examples as I introduce the concept. There's also any time, and again, in a lot of places this is illegal, you put hidden trapdoors, which is like, oh, if your name's Claire, you get like plus 10% in the algorithm, or this concept of shadow banning. I will talk about that in a whole other video, because I think it deserves its own video. But there's some ethical questions around if there's like hidden levers that people can pull. But I will address that in a separate video, because it's quite a deep diving. But anytime you're promoting or suppressing a small group of creators, especially if it's not transparent in how you're doing that, I think that's unethical. But primarily our core goal is to when we talk about these design problems of building an ethical recommender, is build a recommender that's good for the platform and also good for the users, and sort of treats both as equal parties and as an even-handed mediator between the two. And as I say, I think a good escape hatch is in a world where we can provide people the data sets and they can build their own recommenders, or there can be third-party providers who build a recommender. So the example I always go for this at the moment is a recommendation algorithm is not run by not run by computers. These days it kind of is, but historically it's been run by humans. Is when you go to your local Tesco, say, and you go shopping, there's only so much shelf space, and depending on your region and depending on a bunch of other factors, They will decide what to stock where and how much of what to stock, and what goes on the bottom shelf and what goes easy reach and all those kind of decisions. And those decisions are made to maximize the profit of the store. And there's a good argument to say that the practices there are unethical towards the consumer. It might sound a bit harsh. It might sound a bit like crazy left-wing communists to say that, but they are, right? They're like, oh, we'll put sweets by the checkout aisle as you're checking out, so your kids can nag you and grab them, or you can get that sweet craving just as you're queuing and waiting to do your checkout and do that impulse throw. That's not helping you make good decisions, right? But now imagine you went to that same store and your phone was going, okay, well, I know what's in the store. I know currently that these are your food goals, these are the allergies in your household, this is what you have at home, this is what you like to eat. I've got some data on that, and I'm able to recommend products in an aisle and go, hey, in this aisle, here are some of the products, here's where they are that you might like. And that's a good place where a consumer recommender, like a consumer side recommender, I think solves the problem in a good way. But for our series of videos, primarily I'm going to be focusing on the case where the platform, whatever that platform is, has to supply one true recommender for everyone. And so yeah, I think that's an interesting problem. I think if you find that an interesting problem and you have questions around this, post them down in the comments, and we'll go through it, and I'll probably make a few of these. I've already got some sort of topic breakdowns for some of the videos, but yeah, I just want to find out, I want to share this knowledge, and I might get quite nerdy in some of these, because I have one controversial statement I'll leave you with. It is an almost impossible challenge to promote the creators while at the same time giving users the best content. And I'll explain why. Yeah, down in the comments, and I'll see you next one before the wind gets me.